Practice and review. In previous lessons, I introduced the core building blocks, the fundamentals of the Spanish language. These give you the tools to pronounce each letter correctly, understand the sound each letter makes, use question and exclamation marks accurately, identify where the stress falls in a word, and recognize which letters are silent and which must be pronounced. By mastering this material, you'll be able to read, write, and speak any Spanish word. Now we can begin refining your skills and focusing on pronunciation. Remember, pronunciation isn't about adopting a regional accent. It's about mastering the foundational rules that govern how every word is pronounced in Spanish. Let's move on to the practice session. How do you say tree in Spanish? Árbol. How do you say ball in Spanish? One word for ball is balón. How do you say car in Spanish? One word for car is carro. How do you say house in Spanish? Casa. How do you say flower in Spanish? Flor. How do you say cat in Spanish? Gato. How do you say dog in Spanish? Perro. How do you say pencil in Spanish? Lápiz. How do you say book in Spanish? Libro. How do you say peace in Spanish? Pieza. Let's practice reading a few simple words. Try reading this word. Cosa. Cosa. Now you try. Try reading this word. Lupa. Lupa. Now you try. Try reading this word. Lente. Lente. Now you try. Try reading this word. Papel. Papel. Now you try. Try reading this word. Punto. Punto. Now you try. Try reading this word. Lindo. Lindo. Now you try. Try reading this word. Remember, if the C is followed by an E or an I, it makes a soft C sound. Centro. Centro. Now you try. Try reading this word. Cinco. Cinco. Now you try. Try reading this word. Gusto. Gusto. Now you try. Try reading this word. Gente. Gente. Now you try. Try reading this word. México. México. Now you try. Try reading this word. Mancha, mancha. Now you try. Try reading this word. Remember, two L's together make a Y sound, like the Y in English. Llanta, llanta. Now you try. Try reading this word. Calle, calle. Now you try. Try reading this word. Remember, two R's together make a rolling R sound. Carro, carro. Now you try. Try reading this word. Remember, in Spanish, the Q is always followed by a U, and together they make a hard K sound. Quinta, quinta. Now you try. Try reading this word. Poquito, poquito. Now you try. Try reading this word. Remember, when the R is between two vowels, it makes a short tap R sound. Pero, pero. Now you try. Try reading this word. When the D is between two vowels, it makes a soft D sound, similar to the TH in English. Dedo, dedo. Now you try. Try reading this word. When the B is between two vowels, it makes a soft B sound. Lobos, lobos. Now you try. Try reading this word. When the G and the U are followed by an E or an I, the U is silent. Guineo, guineo. Now you try. Try reading this word. Guitarra, guitarra. Now you try. Try reading this word. Extra, extra. Now you try. Try reading this word. In Hispanic America, the letter Z makes an S sound. Zapato, zapato. Now you try. Try reading this word. Mesa, mesa. Now you try. Try reading this word. Amigo, amigo. Now you try. Try reading this word. Mama, ma. Now you try. Try reading this word. Café, café. Now you try. If a word ends in a vowel, or an N, or an S, the stress must fall on the second to last syllable. If the stress falls on the last syllable, we must add a tilde to that syllable. Try reading this word. Actor, actor. Now you try. Try reading this word. Salud, salud. Now you try. Try reading this word. Fácil, fácil. Now you try. Try reading this word. Difícil, difícil. Now you try. If a word ends in a consonant other than N or S, the stress must fall on the last syllable. If the stress doesn't fall on the last syllable, we must add a tilde to the syllable where the stress falls. Try reading this word. Guerra, guerra. Now you try. Try reading this word. Guitarra, guitarra. Now you try. Try reading this word. Vergüenza, vergüenza. Now you try. Try reading this word. Pingüino, pingüino. Now you try. In Spanish, when a word has GUE or GUI, the U is silent. But if the U has a diéresis, then you do pronounce the U. In Spanish, when writing a question or an exclamation, we must use both an opening mark and a closing mark. This applies whether it's a single word, a short phrase, or a full sentence. Here are a few sentences for you to practice your pronunciation. Try reading this one. ¿Qué quieres? Now you try. Try reading this one. ¿Qué calle tan larga? Now you try. Try reading this one. Mi hermano corre rápido. Now you try. Try reading this one. El pingüino llega al charco. Now you try. Try reading this one. Ay, qué chistoso eres. Now you try. Try reading this one. ¿Quién grita ya? Now you try. Try reading this one. Busca el queso en la esquina. Now you try. How do you say hello? Hola. How do you say goodbye? Adios. How do you say good morning? Buenos días. How do you say good afternoon? Buenas tardes. How do you say good night? Buenas noches. How do you say please? Por favor. How do you say thank you? Gracias. How do you say you're welcome? De nada. How do you say I'm sorry? Perdón. How do you say my name is Maria? Me llamo Maria. How do you say nice to meet you? Mucho gusto. How do you ask, how are you? ¿Cómo estás? How do you reply, fine, thank you, and you? Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? Well done. You've just completed the practice and review for lessons 1 through 4, a major milestone in your Spanish learning journey. So far, you've learned the Spanish letter names and sounds, the 5 digraphs, how and when to use the tilde and the diéresis, and the correct use of question and exclamation marks. You also practice reading both individual words and simple sentences. Excellent progress. If you feel confident, you're ready to move on. If not, it's totally fine to review any section again. Learning a language is all about consistency and practice. See you in the next lesson.